breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast with Lizzie Green and Joe Crowley. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Justice Matters Pod for clips. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of murder and rape. Listener discretion is advised. Well, we've got a treat for our regular Justice Matters listeners, something different. We're interviewing Graeme Crowley, who actually is a friend of mine, but more importantly, he is a podcaster himself and former police officer and private detective, and he's got a couple of very interesting podcasts out there. He's done a lot of work on a number of miscarriage of justice cases, so we've got him in today just to talk about those cases, but more broadly about miscarriage of justice and police procedure and things like that. Hello, Graeme.
How are you, Joe?
Yeah, I'm well. So we obviously know each other, just for full disclosure. Well, I think about 2005, 2006 we met?
Yes, I think it was around 2006 and fairly regular contact since then.
Yeah, over the case of Graeme Stafford, which we'll no doubt be talking about in a minute. I'm interested really to start with your background, and I wonder how much that's really fed into what it is that you're doing now, because now you are a regular podcaster and, I should have said, author. You've published one book and you've just released another one, and you've got hopefully a couple in the pipeline.
Yes, that's right. And actually, yes, but my police background was the basis, the grounding for what I do now, without question, without doubt.
So how old were you when you joined the police?
21, and I did 12 years, 2 in uniform, 10 in plain clothes, primarily in Townsville. I did about 18 months in Brisbane, I guess, but primarily Townsville. And the benefit of that, Joe, was if you're a detective in Brisbane, particularly junior rank, I left as a detective senior constable, but up into that rank, you just get what's sort of dished out to you. You don't, and you certainly don't get murders, rapes, serious crime, because there's specific squads for that, and you don't get into those squads until you got some significant experience. But in the country, you just deal with whatever comes across your plate, whatever comes in the door. So
you got some experience investigating murders,
rapes, murders. Large break-ins. Yep.
Missing persons?
Yes, not so much missing persons, but they were on the table as well.
And so 12 years, so you leave as a 33-year-old?
Yep.
And was that last 18 months in Brisbane? Am I right?
Yes, the last 18 months was in Brisbane in the motor squad and Valley CI branch.
And why'd you leave? You got sick of it?
Mate, I never saw the police as a long-term thing. It was always going to be a stepping stone for me. I didn't like shift work. I didn't like I missed the family. You know, we had young children, and policing is a very difficult career when you've got a family, and I saw that, a lot of train wrecks along the way. I just didn't want that. I didn't like there was a lot of things about the police I didn't like, but I enjoyed my time while I was there, but it was time to move on.
And you learnt a lot of skills, which you then took with you, because you then became a private detective, didn't you?
Well, first of all, I worked as an investigator for Telstra for 2 years, which sort of broadened my horizons again, and took me down some paths I wouldn't have never gone down had I stayed in the police. And then, yes, from there I became a PI, and I did that for about 20 years.
Yeah.
And just doing civil cases.
Yeah. Well, except the Graeme Stafford case.
Yes. I usually declined private clients. They were high maintenance, and I just avoided them. But ironically, the solicitors that I was working for asked me to have a look at it, and they were good clients, so I agreed.
Yeah.
And I ended up with the Staffords as a client. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll come back to that, but I mean, still going to this day, stuff on the Stafford case.
Yes, as you know, yeah, we're still doing stuff on the Stafford case, 33 years later.
Yeah. So,
Amazing.
do you class yourself as officially retired now, or you?
Oh yes, definitely. I'm retired. And I class podcasting actually as a hobby.
Yeah, lovely.
I have an interest in the justice system. I have a bit of a justice tragic, so it sort of ticks that box for me. But I actually enjoy it. So.
And a prolific podcaster, I think. So you got 5 series out there. I'll just go through and name them. Who Killed Leanne Holland?
Yes.
And then I think the next one you did was Loose Ends, the Singh family tragedy about Max Seeker.
Yep.
And then, am I right in saying you then did the Palmerville Station one? Where is Bruce Schuler?
No, I did Bring Home Sandrine after that.
Bring Home Sandrine, all right. And then you did Where is Bruce Schuler? About
No, I did Who Killed Sarah Brown after that, and I'm currently still doing Bruce Schuler, Palmerville.
Yeah. So Who Killed Sarah Brown, and then Where is Bruce Schuler?
Yeah.
So 5 of those.
Yeah, all deep dives. Holland was 22 episodes. Bruce Max Seeker, the Singh murders, 33. In total, about 90 episodes.
Yes, a lot. And so different format to our podcast in that we just sort of do one case per episode, but you do deep dives, multiple episodes, really turning over every leaf that you can find in a case.
Yep, that's what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, all right. And so what of the time in your police and I mean possibly as an investigator later and a private detective, what of those skills are you bringing to bear when you're looking at these cases?
Well, investigation skills never change, actually. Investigation skills haven't changed in 100 years. It's just the other things that have changed, like fingerprints and photography have been around for, I don't know, probably 100 years as well. And it's only been in the last 30, 40 years that DNA has come out, CCTV, mobile phones, tracking mobile phones. And so the basic investigative skills have remained pretty much the same. It's just you now have access to a lot more avenues that you can search.
Yeah. And so what are those basic investigative skills?
Well, I was always taught there was 6 when you do an investigation: how, when, where, why, who, and what. And if you do a investigation and you tick off each one of those points, you have covered the case.
Okay. And what's the standard of evidence you're looking for? I mean, I think that's always an interesting one between sort of investigative journalists and lawyers and police. They do often seem to have a different standard for the reliability of the evidence they get. What do you have a particular, you're not going to really hang your hat on something unless you've got some really strong evidence, or what do you sort of think about that?
Yes, I don't go out on a limb unless the evidence is strong.
So what kind of evidence you're looking for? What's the strongest kind of stuff? Because you've seen weak forensic evidence, weak scientific evidence before. Eyewitness evidence obviously often has a lot of problems with it. What is it that you really, what's the gold standard for you?
Well, they vary from case to case. And, out of those 5 podcasts I've done, they have really varied considerably. Holland, as you know, was a strong forensic and circumstantial case until it wasn't.
Yeah.
Max Seeker was a circumstantial case, not so strong. In fact, I always believed that there was more evidence on Stafford than there was on Max Seeker, but a circumstantial case again. And again, now, not so strong, not strong at all, actually.
Yeah.
Sarah Brown was a suicide that was a death that was considered or declared by the police and the coroner to be a suicide, but the evidence there simply doesn't support that, and that's crime scene evidence doesn't support that at all.
So that's not about strength of evidence, that's about inferences to draw from evidence, yeah?
Yep. And then the classic is Sandrine, a missing woman. declared a suicide, but there's no body. How do you arrive at a suicide when there's no body? How can you conclude that it's a suicide? So
Yeah.
they're all different.
That's an interesting one. We've talked on our podcast a number of times about the problems of investigating a case where there's no body.
Absolutely.
And you've actually also got one of those, because that's the Where is Bruce Schuler case, no body as well.
Exactly. That's another one. Yeah. That's yes, that is a bizarre case, that one.
So, all right. So what we might do is I might just quickly walk through some of these cases, and we'll get you to talk about the strongest evidence and the weakest evidence and things that surprised you that came out of the case. So we might start with Stafford. Again, that's an old case. You've been working on it since about 1992, I think.
92 I started, yep.
So Graeme Stafford is convicted in 92 of the murder of the 12-year-old Thean Holland. So she was the younger sister of his then girlfriend, and Graeme Stafford and Leanne and the girlfriend and Mr. Holland, Terry Holland, all lived in the same house out at Goodna in Brisbane's western suburbs. And what was it? 23 September 1991, Christmas holidays, is the last time Leanne is seen, certainly by Graeme Stafford. She's reported missing on the Tuesday night, the 24th of September. Police arrive at the house Graeme Stafford and the Hollands were living in on Wednesday, the 25th, and I think it's zeroed in as on him as the suspect by the Wednesday. Thursday, the body of Leanne is found on the 26th, and then Graeme Stafford's arrested on the Saturday, the 28th, and faces trial in 1992, convicted. 3 appeals to the Court of Appeal, and on the third one, in 2009, finally has his conviction quashed. So you came in 92 as the private investigator after the conviction, and you started looking into the case.
After his conviction and after the refusal of the first Court of Appeal, and on the cusp of him going to the High Court, which is when I got involved in it. And yeah, it was a strong circumstantial and forensic case. The problem with it was that evidence, the police evidence, had never been tested by anyone until I stepped in. You know, it was just a given that what they said was true and factual, and it was obvious that he had done it.
Okay, so when you come into the case, it's been proven already. How do you start with it? Where did you start?
I started with some FOI searches, what are now RTI, as you know.
Yep.
And obtained as much of the police brief as they'd give me.
Yep.
With all the statements. And then I just started going through the evidence. I laid out the evidence as it was, and there was some strong evidence. There was the blood on items in the boot of his car.
Yep.
There was the maggot in the boot of his car.
Yep.
There were 2 sets of, and this was what really sold me on him being the killer. There were 2 sets of tyre prints at the body disposal dump site that were identical to the 2 different tyres that he had on his car. The missing hammer that he had bludgeoned her with. He'd told lies to the police. So yeah, it all stacked up against him.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I laid out all those.
Well, when was the real light bulb moment when you're like, hang on, there's some real problems with this?
Oh, it didn't come straight away. It was a case of I laid out all those points, and then I started looking at each one individually. And it wasn't until, I guess, well, the first point I saw problems with, and the second point I identified problems with, and the third point I identified problems with, and it just went on and on and on. And at some point, you know, within probably 6 months, I went, hey, you know, there's a real problem here. This evidence just doesn't stack up. It's not the evidence that is, it's just not what was given at the court.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So then you worked with the lawyers, and they put together a pardon petition, which then saw the matter come back to court by 97. And so what kind of information did you dig up, which then went back before the appeal court?
Well, probably the most significant one was that the tyres that were supposedly identical to his tyres, in fact, weren't. There were 2 tyre impressions found at the body disposal site that the police said were identical to his tyres, but And in fact, the judge commented 17 times in his summing up that the tyre impressions were identical, and they weren't. They used a police scientific officer with 6 years' experience who had a science degree but no tyre experience to conclude that the tyres were identical. I went and got two people with 60 years' experience between them from Bridgestone, who are the manufacturers of the tyres, and asked them for their opinion, and they gave statements, very comprehensive statements, that concluded that one of the tyres was definitely not identical to Stafford's tyre, and the other was most likely not identical to Stafford's tyre.
Yeah.
And that's just the tyres alone.
One of the other big things you got was Leo Frey, wasn't it? I mean, he was a scientist who worked at, I think, then the John Tong Centre, and he had an enormous amount of experience in looking at murder scenes.
Yes.
And he could only look at the photos then, but he looked at the photos, and what did he conclude?
Well, Freeney was Queensland's chief forensic scientist. He'd been to over 4,000 crime scenes. He'd given evidence over 1,000 times. He was their go-to person when it came to crime scenes. And so we asked him to review the evidence, because I was always skeptical that it was a Crown case that he murdered her in the bathroom of the house that they were living in. Now, when you get a vicious murder like that, she was bludgeoned more than 10 times around the head with a hammer or something similar. You are going to have a lot of blood. It just goes without saying. Head wounds bleed extensively. It's a bathroom. The police pulled up all the tiles, no blood. They checked all the S-bends in the sinks and the bath, no blood. All their testing revealed, I think they came up with 3 drops of blood in the bathroom from memory. And they found 3 drops of blood on items in the boot of his car. But the problem with those were it wasn't in the boot of his car. It was on items in the boot of his car. One was a blanket that was owned by Melissa. One was a rag that could have been owned by anyone. And the other was on his tool bag. But we're not talking vast volumes of blood here. We're talking droplets. And it was police claim that he had placed her body in the boot of that car. So she's been beaten about the head viciously, but there's no blood anywhere. And Leo Freeney just concluded murder didn't happen in that house, guys.
Yeah, that was. I found that compelling as well, just the lack of blood and Leo Freeney's evidence. But you had obviously a lot more information, which you probably don't have time to get through. But in '97, it goes back to the Court of Appeal, and Graeme loses. That must have been absolutely gutting for you.
Well, it was. And Leo Freeney actually gave evidence for the defence at that appeal, and they just disregarded his evidence. The appeal judges disregarded. How and why, I don't know. But,
Yeah.
Yes, I became somewhat sceptical of the system after that appeal.
Yeah, well, I recall, so in 2009, another petition's done up, put in, another hearing, and you came to the next hearing, but you didn't come to the delivery of the judgment, which was on a different day. I don't know whether you're busy or you just felt you couldn't sit there and hear another loss, or...
Yeah, I didn't expect you to get up, so...
Yeah.
So I was just hedging my bets.
Yeah. Anyway, did get up. That was 2009, and we're still going on. There's been, the police allege they've done a review of the case and just maintained their position. The murder occurred in the house, and we've both appeared on some TV programs where they've got some scientists to go back through all of that review. And so, where is it now? Where's the Stafford case at now?
In limbo, as far as I'm aware. He's not innocent. He's not guilty. They could take him back to court on any day, and I wish they would, because then it'd be the quickest murder trial in history. It'd last about a day, because they've got no evidence, and he'd be found not guilty, and which would then, sort of at least clear him. But so he's in legal limbo. The government won't hold an inquest into her death, which is, as I keep banging on about, obligatory under Queensland law, but they won't they won't hold an inquest.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed we might have one at some point.
Yep.
All right, we might move on then to Max Seeker. So he is convicted of a triple murder of his girlfriend or former girlfriend, Neelma Singh, and her two younger brothers. And one of those brothers was 18 and the other was 12. And it was a murder that occurred in the Singh household. And it seems that there was no forced entry, I think, and they seem to have, at least the boys seem to have been killed in their beds, weren't they? And it was quite a brutal murder. But it took a long, so that is in April of 2003, and Max Seeker's not charged till 2008 and not found guilty because it was a very long trial till 2012. Unsuccessful appeal 2013. So when did you become involved in this case?
I got involved in 2021, I think. I was always involved in the case. I was fascinated by it. I couldn't get enough of that murder, and it was such a brutal murder. Oh my God.
Yeah.
It was just a vicious, brutal triple murder. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And along with 99% of the other people in Queensland especially, we all knew Max Seeker was guilty because the Crown, the police and the media told us on regular basis that he had done it. And we're just waiting for the trial to prove that he had done it.
Yeah, well, Max Seeker was no friend of the Queensland Police because hadn't he been involved in burning down the Ashgrove Police Station when he was young?
Yes, he had a lot of convictions. Nothing for violence, but he had like 90 convictions for break and enters and arson and stuff like that. So yeah, and he had done a fair bit of prison time as well.
Yeah.
So So and he, just like Graham Stafford, became chief and prime and only suspect on day one. Max Seeker became chief, prime and only suspect on day one of the discovery of the bodies of the Singh children.
He actually phoned it in, didn't he? He was the one who alerted the police.
He found them and phoned it into the police, and within an hour there's a comment in the police file that he was a suspect. And I can understand that. He would have been pressing all their buttons. The guy's got a lengthy history, and here he finds. And there's an old sort of police thing. If you're the last one to see the victim, or you're the one to find the victim, we should be looking at you pretty hard.
Yeah. Okay.
And they did.
But did they ever look at anybody else?
They eliminated, I think from memory, about 15 other suspects, but how much effort they put into that would only be speculation.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the strongest evidence against Max Seeker? What really is there anything that sort of still troubles you about the evidence against him?
Well, to my mind, after reading the evidence, to my mind, there's no strong, compelling evidence against him. It's almost innuendo, and there's he was the last one. He was the boyfriend. He was the one who found them. His car was seen 2 streets away, which clearly wasn't his car. What else?
There was a phone call, wasn't there? Doesn't he call on the night to Neelma's mobile phone? And
oh yeah, that's true. He called her on the Sunday night, and they talked and said, "See you later." Yeah. So the police concluded that the murder occurred between 11 p.m. on the Sunday night and 7 a.m. on the Monday morning, and the bodies were found at 2 p.m. 2:20 p.m. on the Tuesday afternoon. But the evidence doesn't actually connect with the fact that, in my view, and that the murders occurred in that time. There's a lot of evidence to suggest the murders occurred on the Monday night, but that was the prosecutor's favourite comment in there was, that's a distraction. So it's a distraction that the murders occurred on the Monday night. It's a distraction that someone else was seen there. It's a distraction that this happened. It was a distraction that happened. So it was all about Sunday night.
Yeah, okay. And because, as we found in the Stafford case, trying to ascertain when somebody died is actually quite hard to do. I mean, when you watch TV, you think, oh, it's easy. They could just work out when someone died down to the sort of the minute. But the reality is it's very hard when you have a dead body to work out when they died.
Well, the pathologist concluded time of death for the Singh children somewhere between 4 hours and 2 days.
Yeah.
Which is, wow. But curiously, up until 2006, the police had the bodies in the spa for 12 hours.
Yeah.
That's up to 2006. At the time of his arrest in 2008, that had blown out to 38 hours. So that in a 2-year period, they went from 12 hours to 38 hours, and I can't find out why they did that.
I might just explain that. So I said the 2 boys were murdered in their beds, but where were the bodies found?
They were all placed in the spa in the main bedroom ensuite and filled up with water and a lot of detergent put in there.
And it was a hot spa, and the spa was on, I think, when the police arrived.
Yes, the spa was on, and it was 32 degrees temperature.
Yeah.
At 2:30 in the afternoon. And there was the according to the first responders, the bathroom was very humid. It was a very humid room. It was all closed up and it was humid. And on that basis, the police said, oh, well, it took from Sunday night to Tuesday afternoon to, so it was a lot of humidity, but the temperature would automatically cut off at 49 degrees. So essentially what they're saying is that between Sunday night and Tuesday afternoon, it was still 32 degrees, which is just bizarre.
Yeah. On the water, so the spa water temperature cuts off at 39, and then just waits till temperature drops down, then switches back on. So
49. Yeah.
All right. So what about? So I know that you did a couple of podcasts in between, but your latest, one of your later podcasts was the Where is Bruce Schuler, about the disappearance of prospector Bruce Schuler and Stephen Stuber and his wife Diane Wilson Stuber's subsequent conviction for Bruce Schuler's murder.
That's another interesting case where mainly circumstantial, no body, no one actually witnessed the murder. We have 3 prospectors who heard, basically their evidence is that they heard 2 gunshots, and they tell police that they saw the landowners come down. They heard 2 shots, the landholders leave, and their friend's not there. Their property is bigger than Hong Kong, by the way. There was no DNA. There was 3 drops of blood.
Yeah. So these prospectors, tell us about them.
So that's the curious thing. 2 of the prospectors knew each other. The third one was Bruce Schuler's mate. Why would Bruce Schuler's mate conspire with 2 men he just met the day before to commit a murder? So on that basis, you've got to say, well, we can probably believe their evidence. The problem with their evidence is that I identified 142 discrepancies in their evidence in between their statements and their reenactments. They're just all over the place. It's just bizarre.
What are some of the really obvious discrepancies?
About where they went, who went where, what time they went there, what time they got back.
And what about Stephen Stuber and Diane Stuber? What are they like in terms of their reputation?
Well, they've got a bit of a checkered history. They don't have any criminal convictions, but people prospecting on their property all the time, said it's bigger than Hong Kong, so they're all over the place. It's huge. You could go on there and prospect for days and not come across anyone. But if Stuber caught you on his property, you're gone. Unless you had a permit or unless you had asked permission to be on there, you were off. And he upset a lot of people because of that. And he was fighting with the local council. He wasn't very popular. In fact, as a result of that case, the Queensland government brought in the no body, no parole legislation. And so and they say they weren't there, they weren't involved in murder, they don't know whether. And unless they produce the body, they will, and are most likely to, die in prison because they won't say where the body is. And the police position is they refuse to say where the body is. Their position is we weren't involved, so we don't know where the body is. And there is an appeal in the wind or the wings, and we'll have to wait and see what that produces.
All right, Graeme. So one of the other cases that you have done a podcast on is not like the earlier ones where there's been an innocent person who's been convicted, or you're investigating whether an innocent person has been convicted. This is the case of Sandrine. You did the podcast Bring Home Sandrine, and she has disappeared, and the coroner has said that she committed suicide.
That's right. Sandrine disappeared from Caboolture in 2012, and I'd sort of heard the bit about the case, but not a lot. But in 2022, I was reading the paper, and it was a comment there that it was a 10-year anniversary of Sandrine missing, and it was concluded that it was a suicide, and her body had never been found, which I sat up and took notice of. I thought, okay, it's been concluded a suicide, but her body hasn't been found, so how does that work? How do you conclude it's suicide? So I contacted the family and I said, hey, it's a very interesting case. I'd like to do a podcast on it. And they said, yes, please. We're desperate for any publicity. So I did a podcast on that. I think it was 10 or 11 episodes.
So am I right in saying that the evidence is that she's last seen, she walks out the front of her house, down the driveway to the front fence, and that's the last time that she's ever seen?
Correct. It was actually a friend's property. She was, they were going, loading up the car to go to the showgrounds, and he was packing up the car, and she was waiting at the front gate. And according to him, bang, she was there 1 minute and gone the next. But it wasn't as straightforward as it sort of sounded. As it transpired, there were 3 men in Sandrine's life. And frankly, any one of them could have been involved in her disappearance. And I believe at least one of them was involved in her disappearance. She certainly didn't leave by herself. And like she didn't have a car at that time. The car was being repaired, and she's at a friend's place. So and it was actually a dead-end street, and not the sort of street that a serial killer who's driving around looking for a victim is going to drive down a dead-end street and stumble across a woman who's waiting at the front gate. So it was a very, very sort of bizarre setup. So how the police and the coroner concluded it was suicide is just beyond me. I'm still scratching my head over it.
Well, sorry, they must have had some evidence to sort of rely on. What did they rely on to conclude it was a suicide?
Well, that's a valid question, Joe, and I'm not sure what they relied on.
Depression or something?
That's true. They said that she had mental health issues, and she may have had some mental health issues in the past. Well, she did have mental health issues in the past, and she did have some drug use in the past as well. But there was nothing to suggest that she was mentally unwell that day. And let's go down that path. Okay, she decides to commit suicide. How and where did she dispose of her own body? Like, it's 30 kilometres to Moreton Bay. It's 30 or 40 kilometres up the road to the forest where bodies have been found on a number of occasions around Beerwah there. How did she get there? Surely it should have just been an open finding, but no, they concluded it was suicide.
And what evidence do the police really rely on? Who's giving the evidence?
Well, that's a good question, because there's nothing in the file that I've got and I didn't get the whole file, but there's nothing in the file to suggest where they got that information from, just other than she disappeared, she hasn't been found, she had some mental health issues, so ipso facto she committed suicide.
So you said earlier in relation to the Max Seeker case, one of the things police often do or say is the last person to see the victim alive, needs to be investigated. So who's the last person who sees Sandrine alive?
Well, that was the owner of that house there, and he pretty much got a free pass from what I can see by the police. In fact, the 3 men in her life who were well known to be in her life, there was a lot of evidence to show that they were in her life. They got a free pass from the police as well. No, they weren't investigated at all. And one of them was later telling people that he lied to police about his alibi for that day. He was actually missing for 6 hours at the time that she went missing. He disappeared for 6 hours. And he admitted to 2 women later on, about a year later, that he had lied to police about his whereabouts at that time, but nothing's ever happened about it.
So that case is just in abeyance. You've done the podcast, nothing's come out of that?
Yep, it's just out there. The police are the family are pressing the coroner to reopen the inquest, but that sort of thing takes at least 12 months, and I think it's been about 6 months since they asked the coroner to do it. So who knows what will happen? But
yeah,
technically, that's where it's at.
And then another podcast, which I think is the one that you've done some episodes on, but you're still working on. Although you're sort of still working on all of them, aren't you? You do episodes when something comes to light.
Oh, sure. If something comes up, yeah, I'll do an episode on them.
And so this is a case of Sarah Brown. Who Killed Sarah Brown, I think, is the name of your podcast.
Yeah, another interesting case. I just got interested in that. I saw it on social media and the newspaper, and I thought, oh, this doesn't look right. And I contacted the family, and again, they were desperate. Yes, please, would love any assistance. Sarah went missing from a house, and in Gympie, a residential house, and 7 days later, her body was found 100 and so she was missing for 7 days. And curiously, the occupants of that house, mother and son, and the son has a lengthy criminal history and is actually in prison as we speak. They gave 5 different versions of how Sarah disappeared from that house on that afternoon. And, to me, that's like a red flag at a bull.
Yes. So what happened? Is the coroner given a report for a finding on that case, the police investigation?
Yes, suicide.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Her body was found 150 yards down the road in some bush there a week later. And quite clearly, the level of decomposition was inconsistent with being 7 days in the bush. She looked to, by the decomposition on her body, it was concluded that she'd been dead maybe a day, 2 at the most. Even the detectives commented when they turned up that her decomposition was inconsistent with being missing for 7 days. But still, they concluded that she'd committed suicide. And curiously, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, I got contacted by a guy who's involved in artificial intelligence, and he works in AI, and he said he wanted to run the information or the evidence through AI and just to see what AI said. And I said, yeah, mate, that sounds like an awesome idea. Go for it. And he came back with this report on Sarah, and AI concluded there was less than 1% chance that Sarah committed suicide.
Wow.
Less than 1% chance. And there was an 80% chance that her circle of friends were involved in her disappearance or death.
Wow.
Which just blew me away. So, but it basically just confirmed what we'd found out anyway. There was so many problems with the evidence in that one that we were highly suspicious of the mother and son, and highly suspicious of her circle of friends, that something bad happened to Sarah. And so again, it's with the coroner, and the coroner is deciding whether they will reopen the case or not. So once again, we're in limbo.
Yeah. All this work that you've done, I mean, these are all Queensland cases. They all call into question the work of the Queensland Police Service. How's your relationship with the QPS?
Not good. I don't think I've had a good relationship with them ever since Leanne Holland. I don't think they've liked me ever since those days. So,
no.
Yeah.
Well, it's been, but I mean, they threatened you with being prosecuted on occasion, haven't they?
Twice. for trying to alert them to miscarriages of justice, but I forgive them.
and to be clear, those charges never went anywhere. They were just threats.
No, yeah, they never went anywhere. And why would they? As you know, I'd done nothing wrong. I was just trying to alert them and alert the public that there was problems with the case that I was talking about, and that they should try harder.
Yeah,
and that's what I've always said. They should just do their job, try harder.
We on this podcast have done an episode on media and miscarriage of justice. I think we did 2 episodes actually of the good things that media do and the things that can help cause miscarriage of justice that the media do. You've been involved in miscarriage of justice cases. You've been involved with the media, and now you're out podcasting. Do you have? I mean, is there something about podcasting you think that's useful in miscarriage of justice cases?
I firmly believe, Joe, that podcasting has a huge future, particularly for miscarriage of justice cases. When I was involved in the Holland case, I said to my wife, I've now been involved in a miscarriage of justice personally in my lifetime, and I doubt I will ever be involved in another one. That was how I felt about MOJs. And now there are 2 others that I believe are also MOJs. But the public need to hear this. They need to understand that it's not just straightforward. Just because someone has been convicted doesn't necessarily mean that they've done it. Don't get me wrong. If someone commits a crime, they do the time. I don't have a problem with that at all. I just have a problem to make sure that the system works properly. And we are in all sorts of problems if the system doesn't work properly.
And why? But what has podcasting got an advantage over sort of traditional media in terms of miscarriage of justice?
Well, podcasts are hugely popular. So many people listen to them, and particularly from all over the world. So it's just another avenue. The media, particularly the print media, you're only getting the version of events that the owner of that media want you to have. And a lot of times that is the police case. And I'm not critical. That's the way they do business. They rely on the police for evidence and for information so they can do a story. They rely on the police for information so they can tell a story. And so then it's going to be along the lines of what the police want them to know. And the Max Seeker case is a perfect example. Queensland was bombarded with media stories about Max Seeker, and most of them were biased.
But you've also done some traditional media stuff. You wrote a book, Who Killed Thean, Holland. You co-authored that. That came out a long time ago. Now it was a successful book, wasn't it? New Holland Publishing.
It was quite successful. Yeah, sold more than 20,000 copies. I've just finished the rewrite of that because actually we wrote that in the year 2000. It was published in 2005, and by 2010 it was sort of old news. So I've just rewritten, updated up to 2024. So yeah,
And what's the new book called? It's not called Who Killed Thean Holland, is it?
The Leanne Holland murder.
And I'll let you give it a plug because obviously, obviously, but I'm involved in it as well. So a bit of self-interest.
You are
there.
involved in that. Yep. And the Leanne. Currently, it's available on Amazon as an ebook or download as a soft copy, as a soft cover book, and eventually I'll get it out onto other platforms.
And you're hoping to do books on some of these other cases that you've done podcasts on?
I would love to do a book on the Max Seeker murders and love to do a book on Palmerville. They are just so fascinating cases.
Yeah.
That people who don't listen to podcasts would be interested in reading. There's a big following of true crime out there, whether it be podcast or book, ebook, or hard copy, or even TV. So, I'd like to think that I would be able to get those stories to people who don't necessarily listen to podcasts.
Yeah. So watch this space for those books.
Yes. Probably 12 months, but yep, I'd like to think they'll be out there.
And don't give away anything, but have you got another miscarriage of justice case in the pipeline for a podcast?
I'm working on 2 other podcasts at the moment. Potentially, well, one was again a young woman who died apparently by suicide, but that one's 40 years old in country Queensland. And then a case down in South Australia where a woman went missing about 30 years ago. Body's never been found. The police, fortunately, there have never written that off as a suicide. That's still an open case.
Yeah.
And
if people want to find you, you've got I think a Facebook page, haven't you? What's
yeah.
What is it?
Graeme, I've got a Facebook group page called Graeme Crowley Podcast Investigations.
Yeah.
And I post a lot of stuff on that. I'm on YouTube as Graeme Crowley. And if you just search Graeme Crowley under podcast, you'll find the podcasts I've got out there.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, Graeme, thank you for giving up your time to come on Justice Matters.
My pleasure.
It was a very interesting run through a number of cases where there's some concerning evidence. So hopefully something happens in the Graeme Stafford case and the Palmerville case and the Max Seeker case.
Yes, well, watch this space. They're all out there. The work that Jeff Johnson, that pro bono solicitor, has done in the Max Seeker case is just stunning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Graeme.
No, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode. Thank you.